Hello everyone, welcome to my another video. So in this video we'll be discussing about the nomenclature of the monoclonal antibodies. In the previous video we already discussed about the antibodies, their functions, about the monoclonal antibodies and their types as well, such as humanized, mouse, human, chimeric, etc. So in this section we'll be discussing about the nomenclature. So let's start our discussion. So here you can see that three names has been written over here: stem, substem 1 and substem 2. So what does the term stem means over here? So the term stem means the backbone, which tells us about the suffix, that is mAb, monoclonal antibody, and it is fixed. Then the substem 1 tells us about the source or the type of the antibody, and the term substem 2 tells us about the target of the antibody. I repeat, the term stem refers to the backbone, that is monoclonal antibody MAB, which is the suffix and it is fixed. Then the substem 1 portion tells us about the source and the type of the antibody. The substem 2 tells us about the target of the antibody. I hope it is clear. So now let's look at one example. So here it is written as trastuzumab. So what can we figure out? From the last three alphabets, we can figure it out that the stem of the drug, that is its backbone, means it is of monoclonal antibody class. Okay, see, I have circled it over here, MAB, which tells us about the stem of the drug, the backbone, that it belongs to the monoclonal antibody class. Okay. Now let's look at the substem 1 part. So the substem 1 part tells us about that if we have OMAB in the name, then the O stands for mouse antibody. If we have XIMAB, ZMAB, then Z, XI stands for the chimeric antibody. If we have ZUMAB in the name, then the term ZU stands for humanized antibody. If we have UMAB in the name, then the alphabet U stands for the human antibody. We already discussed about the types of monoclonal antibody in the previous video, the humanized, human, chimeric, mouse, etc. So after looking into the substem 1 portion, let's try to decode the term trastuzumab again. So the last three alphabets are already decoded. It tells us about the monoclonal antibody, its stem, which is fixed. Then the ZUMAB, the ZU part, ZU part, tells us about that it is humanized, means only the hypervariable portion of the antibody is of mouse protein. We already discussed about it in the previous video. Okay, so we are getting closer and at last we'll be able to solve the question. Okay, so have patience. So now we'll be looking at the substem 2 portion. So if there is TU or TUM in the name itself present, then it tells us about that it is tumor targeting, that is against the tumor. If the name have KI in between, then it tells us that it is interleukin targeting, monoclonal antibody. If LI or LIM is present, then it tells us about that it is against the lymphocytes or immune functions. If C is present, it tells us that cardiovascular targeting, monoclonal antibody. If the name has OS, it tells us about that it is against bone. If toxi is present, then it tells us about that it targets toxin. I'm repeating it for once again. If TU is present, it tells us that it is tumor targeting. If KI, then interleukin targeting. If LI or LIM, then it's against the lymphocytes. If C is present, then cardiovascular. If OS, against bone. If toxa, it targets the toxin. Okay, so please have a note of it. So after learning about the substem 1 and substem 2, now we'll be easily able to decode the term trastuzumab. So let's try it for once again. The last three alphabets as fixed will tell us about the monoclonal antibody class. The ZU will tell about the humanized monoclonal antibody, and TU, see I have circled it over here, TU, which tells us that it is tumor targeting. So I am repeating it for once again. Trastuzumab tells us that it is tumor targeting humanized monoclonal antibody. See I have written it over here, against tumor humanized monoclonal antibody. It targets HER2 receptors and blocks proliferation. So it can be used for treatment of breast cancers and all. So let's skip that portion. Let's skip the therapeutics over here. I am not including the therapeutics over here. If you want a separate video on the therapeutics of the monoclonal antibody, please let me know in the comment section. I will upload a separate video on that. Okay. For this section, I am just talking about the nomenclature of the monoclonal antibodies. So let's stay away from therapeutics. Okay. Now, as we looked into the stem portion, substem 1 and the substem 2 portion, so we are now pretty confident, right? So let's try to solve some examples which will boost our confidence even higher. So see here, rituximab. So here MAB means monoclonal antibody, as I have circled it over here and mentioned as monoclonal antibody. You can see XI means it's chimeric, and TU means it is anti-tumor, tumor targeting. So rituximab is a tumor targeting chimeric monoclonal antibody. Okay. Then the next example, adalimumab. The MAB means monoclonal antibody, U means human monoclonal antibody made up of human proteins, and LIM over here, see I have circled it. So LIM means it is against the lymphocytes. Okay. Adalimumab is lymphocyte targeting human monoclonal antibody, which is used in rheumatoid arthritis for preventing lymphocytic destruction of the joints. You already know that. Okay. So let's move to the next example, and here it comes, ixekizumab. Ixekizumab. Let's try to decode it. MAB means monoclonal antibody, ZU means humanized monoclonal antibody, and the term KI circled over here means it is interleukin targeting. So here MAB is the stem, ZU is the substem 1 and KI is the substem 2. So MAB means its stem, its backbone. It belongs to the monoclonal antibody class. ZU means it is humanized, that is its source. It belongs to the humanized class. Then KI, it tells us about the substem 2 portion, that is where it targets. Okay, so it is interleukin targeting. I hope it is clear. It targets the interleukin 17, so it is used in psoriasis. You already know that. It belongs to the therapeutics, so we will not be discussing about it in detail over here. As I told, if you want a separate video on the therapeutics of the monoclonal antibodies, please let me know in the comment section. I will definitely upload a video on that. Okay, now let's move to the other example, denosumab. So what is denosumab? Denosumab, the last 3 alphabets, MAB is the stem, the backbone. Okay, that is monoclonal antibody. U over here tells us about the substem 1, that is human proteins. The source of this denosumab is from human proteins, and OS over here tells us about that it targets the bone. Okay, the target of the antibody, that is the substem 2 portion, OS. I have circled it over here. So where it targets the bones. It is rank L inhibitor. Okay, so denosumab is used in osteoporosis and it targets the osteoclast. You already know that. And what are osteoclasts? The macrophages of the bones. Okay, so let's look at the other example too. Beclatoxumab. MAB tells us about the stem, the backbone, monoclonal antibody. The U tells us about the substem 1 portion, that is the source of the antibody, that is it is made up of human proteins. And the tox over here tells us about the substem 2 portion, that is its target, where it targets, where the drug targets. It is against toxin, so it targets the toxins. Which toxin? Clostridium toxin B. Beclatoxumab targets Clostridium toxin B. It is very important from the exam point of view. Please have a note of it. And what is it used for? It is used for pseudomembranous colitis. One more example over here. Bevacizumab or bevacizumab. The MAB tells us about the monoclonal antibody, its stem. ZU, the substem 1 portion tells us about that it is humanized monoclonal antibody. And C over here tells us about that it belongs to cardiovascular section and it targets the VEGF receptors. It inhibits the VEGF receptors. See, I have written it over here, cardiovascular VEGF inhibitors. Okay, so I hope it is clear. Since we have solved many of the examples, now we will look into the topic biological agents and we will be able to understand it very easily. So let's start our discussion on biological agents too. So biological agents, what are biological agents actually? Biological agents can be classified by nomenclature, specifically their stem or ending, which often describes its functions. Examples include MABs, that is monoclonal antibodies. We already discussed about it and we are pretty much confident because we solved many examples too. So MAB stands for monoclonal antibodies, you already know, and which end with MAB. Example is efalizumab. Easy, isn't it? So let's try to decode the term efalizumab from here. MAB means monoclonal antibody, the stem. ZU means the substem 1 portion, which tells us about the source of the antibody, that is it is humanized. And LI over here tells us that it is immunomodulator, isn't it? The substem 2 portion. So it is pretty easy. Now the second part, the small molecule inhibitors which end with IB. It is very important, so please have a note of it, that the small molecule inhibitors ends with IB suffix. Okay, and example is imatinib. Please have a note of it and let's look at the other examples too. Fusion proteins which end with sept. Example is etanercept. And the final one, the interleukin receptor modulators which end with KIN. Okay, the example over here, aldesleukin. We already discussed about the interleukin receptor modulators, but for convenience we'll look into it for once again. Okay, so please have a note of it. So I have 3 columns over here: ending, category and example. So the small molecule inhibitors end with IB suffix, okay, which target the intracellular molecules. So one by one we'll be discussing about them. Ciclib, it belongs to which category? Cyclin dependent kinase inhibitor. And example is palbociclib. I repeat, ciclib suffix belongs to which category? Cyclin dependent kinase inhibitor. And example is palbociclib. Then coxib belongs to the category COX-2 inhibitor. And example over here, celecoxib. I repeat, coxib belongs to the category COX-2 inhibitor. COX-2 means cyclooxygenase 2 inhibitor. And example is celecoxib. Ending with parib belongs to the category poly-ADP ribose polymerase inhibitor. And the example is olaparib. So please have a note of it. Ending with the suffix rafanib belongs to the class BRAF inhibitor. And the example is vimurafenib. The suffix tinib belongs to the class or category tyrosine kinase inhibitor. An example is imatinib. The suffix zomib belongs to the category proteasome inhibitor. And the example is bortezomib. So please have a note of it. Then the another class, receptor fusion proteins end with sept, and they belong to the category TNF alpha antagonist. And the example over here, etanercept. Okay. So now we'll be looking into a question, an example, to brush up our skills. So I hope you are ready. Here is the question. What type of biological agent is celecoxib? So the drug celecoxib ends with IB. So what does this mean? It means that it belongs to small molecule inhibitors class. Okay, as it ends with the IB and it targets intracellular molecules. It is easy, isn't it? I hope it is clear and it is pretty much helpful to gain confidence after solving some examples. Then we'll speak about the last biological agent class, that is the interleukin receptor modulators, which ends with KIN. We already looked into it, but for the convenience I am repeating it for once again. So if the suffix is leukin, it belongs to the category interleukin 2 agonist. Example is aldesleukin. If it ends with kinra, then it belongs to the category interleukin receptor antagonist. And example is anakinra. So please have a note of it. And let's look at one case study which will resolve most of our doubts. Okay. So here is the question. Please read it carefully and let's try to solve it. So a 68-year-old woman recently diagnosed with osteoporosis presents to the clinic for a follow-up. She has started treatment with a bisphosphonate but saw a commercial for a drug that ended with MAB, MAB, that can be useful for osteoporosis and is curious about how it works and if it would be better, though she can't recall the name. So let's try to resolve it. I have highlighted some important points over here. Osteoporosis, bisphosphonate treatment, and the name of the drug ends with MAB, MAB. So after looking into the highlighted points, what can we figure out? Bisphosphonate is the drug which is used in case of osteoporosis, and she is also suffering from osteoporosis. It is mentioned over here. So she started her treatment with a bisphosphonate drug. Okay. Then she saw a commercial for a drug that ends with MAB, and that drug can be used for the osteoporosis treatment. So we are 100% sure that the drug belongs to the monoclonal antibody class as it ends with MAB, MAB. Then after looking into the points like osteoporosis and bisphosphonate, we can easily figure out that it belongs to the bone targeting class, that is the substem 2 of the drug. So we can relate it with the monoclonal antibody denosumab, isn't it? So it may be denosumab because denosumab is rank L targeting human monoclonal antibody, and the highlighted points over here clearly indicate that the drug can be denosumab. So that's all for today. I think this video was helpful to you. Please share it with your friends, and if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe to the Encephalonian. Have patience, keep learning, and stay safe.